Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode. I would like to speak about where our civilization is heading, and in some sense I find that transformation of civilization to be an alchemical shift, and it has to do with the various ideologies that the human attention is keeping alive. You see, every civilization, every great structure has foundations, has pillars, and so mankind and civilization, we are still treating it through our personal dimensions. When we find the value of civilization impersonally, it becomes a grand structure, a grand tower, like the ancient tales of the Tower of Babylon, a structure built by all humanity united under one language to reach the heavens. And as this structure, as this tower to reach the level of the gods heightens and it goes closer and closer, reaching the clouds where the gods are standing, the gods see this and they instantly make man speak different languages. And through the separation of an inability to acknowledge the same world, we are lost in our own worlds. In some sense, what the gods did in the story of the Tower of Babylon was that all human beings who were united under one language, they in some sense broke. They broke their vision. And so as human beings began speaking different languages, they could not manage, they could not work together to build this grand tower of civilization's efficiency. And so right now, me and you, dear listener, we are alive in a moment in history where it seems to be the aftermath of the Tower of Babylon. But it seems that we have reached the same conclusion, but through a different end. You know, the Tower of Babylon presumes a unity prior to the separation. We feel we were separate, and now we are opening up to more unified ways of existence. To be honest, your DNA has certain secrets that will only be revealed if you attain and hit certain states of mind. And so civilization has a structure, and so this structure, every person's mind is opening up to it, and in some sense a person's intelligence tends to govern in accordance to the ideas or in accordance to the world they see, and the world they see has to do with the self they see. And the self they see has to do with how much internal freedom there is. If there is more external freedom than internal freedom, you will feel as if your mind is being unacknowledged. If there is more internal freedom than external freedom, you feel your body is not being acknowledged. You see, I ask myself why the fashion industry does not make fashion reflect a person's thoughts. You see, it's as if we are not caring for our minds enough, and hence in the middle of this evolutionary process, we are letting go of the ropes that our ancestors held for so long. It's about development, it's about structure. You know, these talks that I give, I hope you listen to them as a designer that does not have a personalized story yet for the world. You're watching. We begin as watchers, and then we become active components of the moment. And so there is a transformation of the relationship of human beings with thought occurring. This is happening in 2019. Of course, we've been thinking that it's been happening for years. But what I mean by that is that in somehow we are lucky as a civilization that we made our mistakes early. And in some sense, there is coming in every phase of evolution is a response to a challenge. The only reason you need to survive in the fittest way is simply because there are challenges that are unfit. The world is moving in ways that man cannot understand, and in order for him to continue, he moves towards what he can understand. It has to do with permission, and freedom is something that not many people can hold. If freedom is like the sword of Excalibur. You know, it's a sword ingrained. It's like literally something you have to pull out of the moment. Your inner reality has to release your outer reality from its past. What that means is your memories are chaining you to ideas that are no longer you, but you still chain to those memories, assume that you're those ideas. And it's not just memories, it's a sort of structure of thought. To be honest, I do give these talks, but on some level, especially when I get really, I don't want to say tired, but after some point it becomes a geometrical pattern. All activity can be translated geometrically, even sound. So what that means is, as I'm speaking right now, you are hearing the words. But if there was a being sensitive enough, perhaps as I'm speaking right now in that subtler field, that being would see geometry. You see its values. A value is, if the unknown is still present, is uncontained. It can't be contained, you know? So it's as if, like, here's the unique thing. We are temporary creatures, but our obsession, I don't want to say obsession, it might have a different connotation, but I'll say like our interest in continuing in manifestation seems to be an eternal urge, as if evolution was a way of a creature still trying to be eternal till its last breath, trying to continue, trying to remain. And for me, when I opened the door of metaphysics, when I kind of looked into what history has said, I realized the lies that were held like truths. I realized language has invaded freedom. There's a war of language. There's literally ideology. It's not just people who are walking in the streets, dear listeners. It is ideology as well. And ideology affects your inner reality. That means it's kind of like, you know how people respect law? Of course, law was it took us billions of years to evolve to be able to be creatures that acknowledge law, you know? But what it is that it's a sort of restriction of nature. And that's where all the problems of humanity are beginning. There is something occurring that makes the creature feel he's abandoning something of inherent value. It's like of innate value, you know, kind of like dishonoring somebody you really love. You know, it's like that kind of feeling, you know. And I realized because we have made the world material, we have denied the unknown shape. It's very fascinating how much of the life you see has to do with what you see more than what is there. And when you understand this, you realize how instantaneous freedom is. Because, guys, I'll tell you something that didn't make sense that I find a lot of people in the New Age community are not asking themselves, you know? A lot of people wearing spiritual hats around the world, these people are not acknowledging. You see, what it is that they went and asked, I remember seeing a video of Shri Prabhupada. Shri Prabhupada can be said to be a very unique yogi. There's this really interesting video. Let me tell you a little bit about Shri Prabhupada. This man started the Hare Krishna movement in the 80s in America. At the age of 70, he left India in a cargo ship, where in his writings he says he was like literally like a match in a matchbox, kind of like how much the cargo ship moved. So imagine a 70-year-old man in a cargo container kind of trying to get to America. Why? Because he's had some inner vision that he needs to go and sell his books in America, right? And so this yogi he goes to the West, and he lands and he starts a really small shop in the 80s, you know, a Hare Krishna shop, you know, and he even takes his books to a publisher, and the publisher says, man, this is impossible. And he, like Shri Prabhupada, like a badass, looks at the guy and says, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary, you know, and the guy's like, oh shit, I've just been humbled, you know. And what happens is, evidently, he enters the Western society at a time in the 80s where there was this whole psychedelic revolution occurring with LSD and other psychedelic substances. right? So it was a situation where every country in every phase of its history is learning about itself. You can say, you can say, I find the reason America, the country America, it has in some sense, in regards to communication, advanced really further in regards to technology and stuff, is because there was a sort of unique civil war. And I find the Civil War had a very, because I see nations as minds, to be honest. Not always, but I tend to consider that a mind is something that has known qualities and unknown qualities. So anytime I see something that moves in an unknown way, it's not that I ascribe a mind to it. It's not like that. It's not like I see the leaf move and I'm like, what mind moved that leaf? It's like a wind hitting the leaf. It's not like that. I'm saying it in the sense that, for me, knowledge has to do with how knowledge has been placed in the unknown. That is what we're looking for here. Our ancestors, whether you like it or not, 100% you had an ancestor that looked at the sky and was like, what is all this? Definitely there must have been a moment, in the lineage of all beings, of all human beings. It's the thing of peacefulness. You see, it's as if you're in a world. The world has an intelligence. If you see the world as inanimate, that you therefore disconnect yourself and limit yourself to your subjective intelligence. But human beings should realize that because of the body is extended from Earth, it does have certain memories of how it extended. As if you got up your bed and now you're standing beside your bed, but you still have memories of how the genetical content moved. And when I say memories, these are different memories. Sometimes what we can say is a memory is like imagine, this is going to be a strange example, but I think it's going to fit. Imagine right now your present reality is like the water inside a cup, and imagine the cup is like the DNA, the genetics, how your DNA has opened your eyes, or how your eyes have been opened. And so it's that situation where once we get rid of the water, once we see beyond, the momentary self, we come to the edge of design. And to be honest, what happens is, let me tell you how you transition between dimensions, at least conceptually how I could translate it. Okay? First of all, it has to do with attention. If you don't study how your intelligence is being your attention, then you'll probably stumble in the darkness of the ego, But if you take seriously that you're here once, and why not study who you are? You only get one chance to kind of really truly befriend your mind in this life. Because this is the issue. If too much cruelty is shown to you, the concept of hope will make you angry. If too much failure, if you are a person who's literally failed repetitively one after another, you will eventually reach a point where you're like, what is this success that I'm failing so much for? What kind of success could it be? You begin doubting the principle. And in life, there's a transition. So what that means is right now, playfully, I'm saying this incredibly playfully and just to contribute to the imagination of our species, I'm saying this. If I was playfully, imagine, let's entertain a scientific kind of theory of parallel dimensions. If I was to move from this parallel dimension to another dimension without a portal, only the consciousness wanted to transition from the plane of existence, how the piloting would occur and how the pilot of consciousness would navigate is that in some sense you are right now an individualized, attribute-filled kind of creature. Okay, so if you were to be in a totally different environment, it pretty much means you shouldn't be defined by this environment. So the mind has to feel some sort of freedom from space. You need freedom from space, which is kind of, it's like, that's a very intense statement because, it's like, how is space holding us, in a sort of cage, So what I'm trying to say is that, think of it this way. All the cultural, social programs, all these as you reverse engineer out of the dimension, you come back to a level of design. So you know how we look at a tree and we're like, yo man, that's just atoms there, right? It's an atomic structure. It's an atomic phenomenon. We see fundamentally, it's like, who are we? If I believe materialism, in some sense, I am an electron talking to you. How do you feel about that? I find that it has to do with all the multidimensional programs reach a stopping point, and then all the singular programs reach a stopping point, then the witness reaches a stopping point, and then it's no longer knowledge moving the unknown, it's the unknown moving knowledge. And when the unknown moves knowledge, there's no doubt, there's no trust, there's no truth or falsity. It's just a movement. And that is the beauty about human life, that we ascribe meaning to what we do, but at the same time, we should not ignore what is actually going on. We have to be careful. The artists of today have more of a responsibility. It's much more heavier to hold a paintbrush nowadays, when the world is forgetting how, in some sense, art is bleeding out. It's like this world has forgotten art. It's one of those things that I deep down, and when I'm kind of alone, it's like, the thing is, this is something that, I don't know, maybe it's good to share. There's moments where I get enraged and angry, but I never let it externalize. That means you got to notice that thoughts are making you angry, and what thoughts are your subtler attention, kind of like what the eyes of your mind see, while the eyes of your body are in a reality. We are multidimensional. We don't have just some people say there's three eyes, okay? And and this is hilarious, because in yoga most people think they have a third eye. Like, these people actually think the pineal gland is an eye, right? That's a thought being entertained in the New Age community. Some people are trying to open their third eye, not realizing the third eye doesn't open. It's not an object. It's the shape giver, the third eye. The third eye is not a physical thing, and it's not per se a subjective thing. It's the suggestion, and the kind of how all the sages and all these gurus of India, they've all been pointing to one thing, that deep down behind your eyes, you are how existence is being conscious, and prior to definition, that is the truth that is within all. Do you see? It's as if it's on an energetic level that these mystics were acknowledging reality. This is why they had a sort of simplicity in trying to suddenly renounce the whole world, which was intense. I consider mystics to be extreme explorers of the mind of man. People who, they saw the normal program. They saw the success that their ancestors wanted, and chose to walk into a different world. You see, it's as if sometimes I'm like, why is civilization making so many mistakes? And I realize, oh gosh, I've opened my eyes in history during a phase where it's like, it's the cleanup process has begun. It's as if the great remembrance is occurring. Think of this, that life's end is a great remembrance, and kind of like what is occurring, I find that it's like, if in this world, if there was enough intelligence to create individual beings, there's definitely enough intelligence to create collective beings. And what that means is the pattern, like I'm like, what the hell is this earth doing? Endlessly bringing civilizations rising and falling and rising and falling and rising and falling. It's like, what are you doing, planet? As And I eventually realized it is the aim for not an individual survival. It is the collective survival. That means, imagine right now you're the fittest person on this planet, and in all dimensions you're fit, financially, physically, mentally, in all dimensions you're fit. You're surviving in the greatest way, Imagine that. Now imagine, after you have survived, you are in some sense trying to survive, you're going to see that The value of life is in the greatest thing you saw that you could do and you didn't. And what makes that thing great is it's like an idiosyncrasy. It's so personal. It is so personal how your mind is being played like an instrument, as if when Beethoven was moving his fingers and playing the piano, it was as if he's like, it's not only the piano keys that are moving, it is the whole cosmos that is moving as I play, you know? And that's the kind of performances that were, present back in the day. Now the world has become too shy for its own good, so it's accepting the bad. It is giving in. That means we are negotiating terribly. That means imagine the human civilization was negotiating with destiny, and destiny was like, the way you're happening, human civilization, you're going to end. I mean, it's going to be messed up. You're going to kill yourself, And human civilization is like, nah, man. And the negotiation begins where destiny is like, this is what's going to happen. And we're like, no, we have free will. This can happen, And so I'm being, of course, incredibly playful here. But what I'm trying to say is that there are forces, and really how it happens is that you master individual existence, and then you master of the observer. You don't master those. You master. Mastery is simply acceptance, by the way. Those people attain mastery who they are no longer running away from their moment of being. They have chosen to wield it. Most people are running away from life because it freaks them out, because their beliefs are based on the past and the future is always bringing something new. If you choose not to meet the challenge of the day, then your mind doesn't evolve simply. That means it's like your teachers are not just order, it is also chaos. Because it's as if there were certain smart students in the past, they knew how to speak to the teacher. That means it's like, just like how the authentic teacher is trying to bring out the authentic student, in some sense the authentic student is trying to bring out the authentic teacher, And what that means is, it's all about the world you see and what you're sharing about it. And I'm telling you, it's so hilarious that we have to be playful, because think about it. Even though there was a point where countries spoke different, like there were various villages, that spoke different dialects, Once there came nationalism, there came suddenly like one language for one country, So it was as if suddenly one idea was chosen, one language was chosen, One dictionary was chosen, and all the other villages and their languages, they had to adjust, to be able to understand the collective in some sense. I find our psychologies are designed to be dynamic. Our intelligence is not designed to just take a snapshot of language as a belief and live its whole life in that box of thought. Okay, you have to learn to push your world back, and most people are afraid of pushing. And what I mean by that is they're afraid of trying. And let me tell you, you're afraid of trying unless you realize you require to try new things. For it becomes play. It's kind of like the person has a fear, and the moment they go to confront that fear, they reach the edge of their fear, they suddenly see, oh my God, why are they freaking out? It becomes a playful dance, So the thing is, the world, you're not meant to know everything all the time. And in some sense, you're not meant to, in some sense, think that you don't know anything. Life has to do with a sense of style. That means I didn't understand this when I was younger. And I find a lot of children don't understand this. This is why consumerism catches them very easily. very easily. You know, it's because the person doesn't have an identity, but has access to the identity of others. Back in the day, people didn't meet that many people. They met a few people maybe in their lifetime, you know. Maybe they only got to a village, you know, and that was it. But now the internet and the media are giving us access to so many personalities. That means in some sense our DNAs are no longer unique. That means if you say that the person's DNA has to do with their behavior of the ancestors sculpting the DNA, you know, so in some sense nowadays, if your behavior is being sculpted by the DNA of another, do you know what I mean? That means you're as if imagine you were like in a parallel. Okay, imagine in a parallel universe, a child is born. Okay, and this child, instead of just being alone with itself and exploring life experientially, it just gets access to media, and after some point children don't have that much energy to think, so they will make simple conclusions. That means when you give a young child too much data, it's not that the child will the child will look into that data until its intelligence gets tired of it. You see, regardless of how much, you know, a person talks about being awake and conscious, you got to sleep at night, you know. You know, it's like the gurus would shout, "Wake up, we people, wake up," and then the guru would go back to sleep. You cannot save anything that you cannot see. And for me, it's like Noam Chomsky and Michel Foucault. These two are great minds. I'll speak about them that way. These two great minds were having a debate, and in that debate there was a confrontation about both viewpoints, where it was as if Chomsky was coming from this angle that it's a sort of genetical, subconscious sort of creativity that's inspiring the human being, and what it is that is, in some sense, it's truth, and in some sense, Michel Foucault was saying there are certain blockades and barriers to truth, and if what you think you see at first is not the only thing you see. You see. It's as if the concept of liberation had to mean just letting go. What else could it mean? You know, someone, either you're waiting for God to give you heaven, or you have to go find heaven, you know. You know, you can say finding heaven is evolution. Is the free will. And you can say when heaven finds earth, that is divinity. When the unknown reminds, no, that means it's not a complete emptiness. Life and death is a wheel. It's a wheel that's spinning. It's an axis you have put the world in, you know. What it is, believe it or not, attributeless objective phenomena. This is why I say consciousness is attributeless, you know. I'm roaring this. Like, I remember I spoke to a neurologist, and I asked the person what he did, and of course he told me he's studying consciousness in a lab in Switzerland. Like, I'm not joking. This was a sort of incubator meeting, random incubator meeting, you know. And so while I was there, I was speaking to the man, and the man, suddenly I asked him, what kind of research are you doing on consciousness? Do you know its origin? Have you answered the hard problem? And I just asked him directly, you know. And he looked at me, and he in some sense said something like, they have not, and it becomes impenetrable at some point to make a conclusion, rational conclusion about the phenomena. And I remember I told him something very interesting. I asked him a question. I mean, of course, the way I spoke then was very different than how I said it now. It was much more gentler and, you know, with different vibe. But I'm saying, like, I remember telling him a story. I'm not joking. Like, literally, it was, I've been giving these Mr.Within talks for a few years, you know. So when randomly the theme of consciousness comes up, I feel like, anyways, in that moment, this neurologist, you know, I told him the story of this yogi, and pretty much my question was like, you explained to me how consciousness works after this story. Like I was kind of implying that. And this story was pretty much about this guru, and he has his disciples kind of in the forest, these bunch of yogis, you know. And the guru looks at one of the disciples and says, "Go get water for the tribe, man." You know, and the guy goes. The guy gets the bucket and goes, and he follows his intuition and finds the river, you know. And in some sense, the guru also tells him there's a river there, and you know, whatever. And so what happens is this man goes and eventually finds like some river or something, you know, and he puts puts the bucket in the water, and he's watching the bucket get filled. And as he's doing this, his head turns to the left and he sees this incredibly beautiful woman that suddenly his heart screams and he falls in love with her instantly. Right? So he forgets about the bucket, he forgets about the guru and the enlightened ethics and all this, you know, and he just goes with the excitement of the moment. And the story goes that he goes to the girl that's there, and he says, "You're beautiful. I want to marry you." Something very passionate and intense, you know. And so the lady there, she looks at him, and it's as if like back in the day, women weren't allowed out of the house that much. It seems, you know. And so she felt like this was a rare opportunity. She tells the guy, "Okay, you come and speak to my father and get his blessing, and I'm going to peek and listen from outside the door, okay, to what you're going to say. And if my father says yes, and then we can get married and, you know, the rest." And so the guy eventually goes. He's so in love, he goes, you know, forgets about, like, you know, the thirsty. And just a second, guys. The father-in-law meets him, and the father-in-law has a conversation with the guy, and he says that he sees the man is sincere and he's honest and whatnot. And the father-in-law says, "You can only marry my daughter under one condition." He says that "I've never had a son, and so you can never leave this village. And when you marry my daughter, you have to live here, and after I die, you're going to become the biggest landowner of the village, and all my belongings are going to come to you and my daughter." You know, and he says something like that. The man who is in love looks at the father-in-law and says, he agrees. And so years pass by. He has a daughter, he has a son, and the father-in-law passes away gracefully, you know. And so he has this kind of paradise of a life, you know. He has this sort of kind of heaven for himself, you know. And so one day, him and his children and his wife are on the top of a hill enjoying the sunset. And to his shock, he sees tidal waves destroying the village and all the land and property, you know. And the tidal waves are rising to such a point that one of his kids fall, the other kid goes to save that kid, and that kid falls, the mother goes to save them, and suddenly the tidal waves has swept away his paradise away from him. They have thrown, as if he has been banished, you know, from heaven. This is why you got to make sure your heaven isn't temporary. Anyways. In that moment, he looks at those waves and he's in shock. He has lost everything. And suddenly he hears a voice. He hears a voice that says, take the bucket out of the water. And it's the guru and the disciples. His family has come to him, you know. So what happens is that he suddenly snaps out and sees all that thought he had of marriage, of love, of in some sense having a father-in-law, being a landowner, having children, having a sort of structure and shape to paradise, you know. He realized all of those occurred in an instant. All of it occurred in an instant. And so when I said this story to the neurologist, I told them, you tell me how in an instant one can be in behind their eyes someone else. That's the fascination of consciousness. It's as if, like, okay, if you could interview the neurons in your brain, they'd be like, bro, I don't know, something's happening. They're running, you know. We ascribe intelligence. We give intelligence to phenomena. We give the name atom to the atom. And therefore we impose the design and we extract knowledge out of the unknown. So that's the position of our free will, if you want to be an individual in this world, a strong individual, you have to understand your free will. You have to, in some sense, get rid of stories of shame and guilt and just look at life directly and see what it is and then honestly live. That's it. You know? So we have to contribute to an efficient externalization of human behavior. You know, it's as if these waves are occurring, hitting the surface of our planet, and these waves are various ways human beings are behaving, and their overall kind of accumulated effects are kind of hitting us, you know? It's as if the thing is, it's kind of like a circle, you know? Fear is one point in the circle. It's like, that means it's not the end. It's kind of like a loop. Anytime you fear something, you have denied reality. You feel like you didn't take the opportunity. Do you know? And then you get programs of shame in your psychology. There's a quote in the Diamond Sutra, which is seems to be a rare Buddhic text, which is very fascinating. It's like when I first read it, it's like I committed it to memory because it was incredible. It's like the quote, listen to this quote. It says, keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything. That means, what if you were free and your movement was the cage? What if you do nothing, everything is just being here? But when you do, you choose to sculpt the surface of the earth with your mind. And so when a person is not responsible for themselves, eventually when you accumulate a sort of level of internal, kind of like Game of Thrones, shame, like internally what happens is it blocks your intelligence because there has come a denial of your freedom, you know? I write short stories, and some of these short stories are in development, but one that's very recent, I'll share with you. It's the story of this conqueror who wanted to be king. And he conquered everyone. And he got to the crown throne. And he picked up the crown. And the whole world had listened to his free will. And this was the ultimate moment where he was about to put this majestic golden crown on his head. But when he came to put the golden crown on his head, before it hit his head, the crown turned into paper. It became a paper crown. The moment he took it off, it became suddenly a majestic golden crown. As if the crown knew who was worthy or not. And so the story begins that this king has to throw away the crown of his ego. He has to stop listening to the past and to look at the world anew and realize it's about the journey of human beings. And ideology is like something on the side. You see, you don't have to be defined by language, but you cannot ignore it as well. Because it's a technology, we need it. And, you know, just like how you need like air conditioning, you know, we need language. But unfortunately for language, there isn't a number you can call to fix it. There is a sort of, like, you have to realize it's okay to start from a state of freedom. You know, it's like the Zen, there's a Zen saying that says, when you climb the mountain, start at the top. And what that means is, like, a lot of people I find look at the kind of Buddhic and Zen approach, and they feel these people are afraid of life, you know? But from another angle, these people, their minds were strong enough to attempt to wonder about how this world is empty. That is Buddhism's, like, a lot of people think Buddhism is just happiness and stress-free relaxation. No, if you truly dive into the ideology, you will see it is a challenge for the archetypes of your individuality against, like, kind of how the nature of consciousness is present. Sogyal Rinpoche, this Tibetan sage, he tells us, unless you conquer anger, your enemies will be inexhaustible. That means unless you bring some sort of internal peace and clarity, whatever that may be for you, you know, it's as if you will have endless enemies, because there is a resistance to the nature of design. As if you don't understand you're in a changing world, everything that changes is going to freak you out, you know. But if you understand how the world is running and you run with it, you run with it with the kind of like the same wilderness, as if, imagine, like, you know, our species strangely through war has had very great collective moments. It's as if it didn't matter the struggles of the of that kingdom. The whole kingdom, in some sense, was attempting to be the same point of strength. So imagine 8 billion people right now. A lot of them probably have membership cards to gyms. But what if there was a membership card towards this great vision called humanity? This science project that's 4 billion years old. I feel we're forgetting the world. That's what's happening. We're entertaining ourselves to extinction, and how hilarious, you know. Like, we are intentionally, out of not being able to meet with the intensities of the day, kind of collapsing into, I find, this is of course my personal view, you know, I'm just sharing here, but I find that there's always a possibility that a belief can become a box over your head. That what that means is your attention literally doesn't go away from that thought. And of course you have choice. That means you can't just move your hands and legs. You can also move your attention to what is subjectively valid. You can say, like, here's a interesting thing. There was a time I sat down and I kind of wanted to make a list of what I find are examples of collective beings in this world of ours, you know? And so I came down with an interesting list, you know? One of it was, for example, a business institution or organization. You can say that organization or kind of cultural program is a certain, you know, entity of its own. You know, imagine everybody in the company is like the cells of the company, you know. And you can say the inefficiency of the health of the company has to do, you know, with as if like a part of the, it's like as if you're sick and you don't heal yourself, you know. A lot of companies fail because they don't heal themselves, you know. Anyways, so a business institution, a business entity, you know, is an example of a collective being. Another example of a collective being is ideology, a thought, a belief. Like imagine 8 billion people looking at the same thing and only believing the same thing. Is pretty much we somehow found a way to clone ourselves. We all are becoming a clone to the limitation of where our attention is kept. So another example of a collective being is kind of a Vedic example, is a more of a yogic example, which has to do with just the witnessing presence. So pretty much another example of a collective being is literally a moment, the whole moment of being, just being aware it's being, you know. You can say that, and of course I forgot the major one, that the whole world is one being. You know, that's another example of a collective being. And of course, guys, you know, there's I don't remember everything I wrote, but but if something comes to your mind of what you think is a collective being, an example of it, that'd be interesting for you to share in the comments. So anyways, pretty much I'm just getting to this notion because I realize I didn't fully communicate the significance of that Shri Prabhupada story I was saying. Pretty much it has to do with a disciple of his asking Shri Prabhupada, how long does it take to get enlightened after all these kind of previously LSD drug addicts have now become religious kind of, you know, very like peaceful religious people, you know. And but of course incredibly idealistic, you know. And so the guy asks, you know, Shri Prabhupada, how long does it get to get enlightened? And Shri Prabhupada is like sitting on a sort of platform where he feels like he's maintaining the illusion and just waiting for truth, right? And so suddenly when this guy says, how long does it take to get enlightened? Shri Prabhupada snaps out, literally as if like somebody, as if like, so it's like you're waiting for pizza. Somebody says pizza here and you just get off your chair. That instantaneity, you know. And Shri Prabhupada gets up and he just instantly looks as if somebody's asked a real question. You know, somebody actually cares, you know, for what Shri Prabhupada is seeing rather than just what he's saying, you know. And Shri Prabhupada just shouts and he says, it takes an instant. It takes an instant. And that was the response. That means everybody who's ever had seen the idea, you know, of the concept of a sort of liberation, enlightenment, some sort of ultimate state, you know, it's an instant away. That means just consider it. How can you change instantly? So it has to be an internal change, instantaneous shift. You see what I'm saying? It's like we have to, every person every day is redefining their different dimensions of being. You know, redesigning it, revaluing them in accordance to what is said. You know, it's as if, you know, you can imagine our ancestors living somewhere and somebody's like, yo man, there's like, this is a dangerous spot or something, and then the person moving away, you know, like away from a volcano or something, right? So what I'm trying is like the data, the waves of data that hit us every day kind of sculpt our response to the moment, you know. And it has to do with what the pretty much how how content you are with life being present naturally. There's a simplicity to life, which is not a complex belief. You don't need complex beliefs for it. It's simply just, you can say, it's like that moment where you wake up in the morning and nothing has happened in the day yet. It's just like a sort of simple, sincere observance. And it's like when you don't look for things, you actually see the things you're looking for. That's the thing. But when you're chasing something, you are blinded by your outcome. And that's a tragedy. That means the exploration is artificial, you know? That means if somebody has a certain strict and specific belief on how the world is, it doesn't matter how much we explore, it gets filtered through that belief and fed to the future generations. So for me, it has to do with first human beings acknowledging that they have positions of, you can say, awareness of mind. That means you're not just an object because, you know, there's something more here. There's something that's moving, that's you, right? It's like I wouldn't be giving this talk if we were all just objects, you know? There's something moving that is animate. Now we give a reason for this being animate, of course, in popular, secular modern thought, in the sense that it was a long evolutionary process. It was as if like the hands of God or the hands of the unknown or some unknown force was sculpting how all these laws were looking like, you know? And so the question is not, I do not disagree with the Big Bang, but I cannot understand how the geometry and the designs were here. You see? It's as if the mystery is not chaos is very easy to see. You know, chaos is the standard. You know? It's like in Greek mythology, Kronos, the first god, you know? The first dude above the clouds, you know? So it started from chaos and then went to order. And right now we are all in an ordered civilization wondering about chaos and extinction and what are we going to do about the world. And the world is so artificial that any attempts so far I've literally seen certain videos on online and I'm not going to tell you what those videos were, but like I was watching important people in important rooms speaking about certain collective visions of what the future should be and how peace should come, you know? And you know what I realized? I realized it's all just emotional gratification. There is no strategy, there is no tactic. It's as if the creatures on this planet have not realized how isolated we are. We have not understood where we are, you know? That's why we are so, oh my God. It's as if it's like when you're afraid, the first bargain you get, like the first offer you get, you accept. You don't want to see more. You know what I mean? I guess I gotta say something about alchemy before I end off. Alchemy is another way of saying metamorphosis, but on a chemical level. It's like like the idea comes from lead, or I don't know if it was lead or mercury. I think both were options. That in some sense lead was turned into gold. And the way lead turned into gold for many mystical cultures was a metaphor for the transformation of the being. You know, ancient cultures were not as restricted as we are now. We have this kind of banner of a free civilization, but to be honest, it's like a machine, kind of like barely working. You know, so it's too mechanical. Therefore, the creative ability of the human mind is being wasted because we're doing jobs that robots can. But if imagine in the future, in the next 100 years, everything's automated, what would people be doing? And the thing is that it's simply the same thing you would do when you get bored. You create. You move. You relocate. Do you see? I find that our minds are mysteries that we must pursue. I find every person has contributions they can kind of share. Behind your eyes, there is a world. If there's nothing behind your eyes, you have either transcended space or you don't exist. You know, or you're a robot. You know, I don't know. But it's to be honest, there is something here. There is intelligence here. It is not all. It's like our free will is not a slave to just its genetical design. The genetical design is best treated as a vehicle. That means something that you're first seeing, you want to keep your distance, right? It's like the first time a man saw a tiger, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go hug that tiger. It's like, you know, the person was alert. There was a sort of attention to what that phenomenon was, how that creature was going to move. And so imagine having that same sort of alertness you have to a wild animal in the forest, you have to thoughts and ideology as you go about the day. And you suddenly realize the value of listening, that your sensory perception is up to you. It's literally up to you how intelligence moves. And that's I don't know how to say it, but it's like the whole mystical game is it free will or is it divine will, you know? In this world of ours, free will is shunned by the divine, you know, and divinity is forgotten by, you know, those who never needed it. So in some sense, the world has become, there's a war of ideology going on. And if you think you're a thought, you will become a casualty of this war. We must remain as observers. What that means is there was a reason they said patience is a virtue. Because sometimes when you think about something, you need to give yourself subconscious processing time. That means sometimes I've had certain challenges and you know, problems where I don't like, technically I don't feel the concept of the problem, like I don't approach a problem that way. For me it's like let's say a puzzle, okay, that's a better way because you need to have the same sort of dexterity. I sit down and rather than looking for an answer, I just look at what the question means to me. And it's kind of like as you keep your attention on one idea, your mind endlessly begins generating kind of insight. It's as if there's a sort of force, a sort of curiosity, is a sort of beam that's causing us as a creature to kind of like move towards the unknown, you know. And it's not this whole thing about safe in internal safety and security and a sort of various zones of kind of comfort and discomfort with the world. I find that to be a theatrical performance. I'm telling you, if you can totally surrender your free will to a thought. Imagine if I say if someone says I'm the greatest archer in the world, randomly. Eventually that person will go through life realizing that nature has designed us not to remain in one place too long, in one state of mind for too long, and so we find that we're so content with going to sleep. But then people think of the concept of death and they're like, oh my god, what are they? Do you know what I mean? Like it's like, what stance is the creature on this rock having in regards to this universal sector? And I saw various streams. I kind of like, when I entered the library, it was literally like, I walked in a world where there were universes on each shelf. How the eyes of man open to the eyes of the world. How much we choose to do things that our ancestors could only dream of. How far we realize that if we live for others, this could be another example of a collective self, of a collective being. That as you serve your world, naturally, oh God, how would I say this? Dissolution of the ego into a presence that reanimates itself. It's like, what can you say? The transformation of the ego into the collective presence, which means, this is the incredible thing, that enlightenment is a moment where a human realizes, prior to being a human, there was something here. Prior to being animate, there is a field of intelligence present. It's the ultimate trust, kind of how in certain, Bhakti yoga, they say it's the surrender of the ego to the decency of the natural world. The secrets of the universe are behind your eyes. And when you realize this, you will become a pilot of your consciousness. That means thought doesn't dictate you. You have served the subjective realm to a point where the subjective realm is no longer occupied. It becomes a silent ally. Literally, your mind doesn't go against you. Because that's what stress and depression and all this kind of, failure psychology is. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and whether we like it or not, all ideals transform. Transformers, ideals in the sky. Jesus Christ. Okay. Much blessings and namaste, guys.